I have 14 minutes and 58 seconds to run through what I think AI-first banking is. As you can see up there, I put my LinkedIn and my business card. I'm always interested in meeting banks who are looking for startups around AI and agentic AI. So if you want to meet and chat, please reach out. Tell me where you found me and met me, because as you can imagine, I get lots of requests. So what I'm going to do in 15 minutes is talk about AI-first banking, and primarily it's about what the hell is that, right? What is that? And the challenge is that because there's so much hype around AI and there's so much noise, what's real? What's real and what's possible? And what I'm going to try and do is whiz through relatively quickly some of the components and the characteristics of what AI can do today and what does that look like. So I think you can download the slides, but if you can't, please, again, reach out. So what's the problem? What is the problem that people have, right? The challenge is that banking, frankly, is pretty staid. It's not really dynamic. If you're a fintech, it's slightly more sexy. But the reality is banking really hasn't changed. And we've seen all these fintechs that have taken huge amounts of market share from different companies, from different banks and different departments in different banks. You've got the regulatory burden. So if you work for large financial institutions, you'll know that you have hundreds, if not thousands, of people doing manual work, and you have loads and loads of people doing manual work of all kinds, whether it's building software, whether it's doing compliance, whether it's running risk, whether it's trading. The reality is, innovation is really, really hard in most enterprises like that size. So how do you break it? What are the things that you could do, potentially, and how do you migrate to this new world? And I'm just going to whiz through that. And I call it augmented banking to autonomous finance, right? Autonomous finance means how can you let machines do a lot of the work that you would do, and how can you be happy that it's going to happen and happy it's going to be successful from a reg perspective, because I'm sure all of us know people talk about hallucinations in models and that kind of thing, but actually, these days with the advance of technology, really you can do almost anything and make it work. So if you've seen what's happened in the last 3 years, you've really seen, in one side, things like traditional software, dashboards and SaaS software. Frankly, for me, it's now legacy. It's legacy shit because it hasn't innovated. If you talk to all these vendors out there and you say, am I doing AI? They say, yeah, we're adding AI to our system. The reality is their tech stacks are old. They're bolting on AI. They haven't fundamentally changed the way that they have software. And that's hard, right? I'm not saying it's easy. Migrating from what you've built over the last 10, 15 years, SaaS software stack, to a new architecture is nigh impossible, right? So I'm not saying that it's a bad thing. It's just that's the nature of software. What we've seen in the last 3 years is so many institutions buying co-pilots. So I know one bank that spent $100 million buying co-pilots for every member of their staff, which I think is crazy, right? How can you spend $100 million and give everybody access to Copilot without training them on how they can use it? And I'm sure every one of you have used Copilot, whether it's chatbots from OpenAI or somebody else. Now, the future is what I say there is agentic AI. How do you build systems that you can plan tasks, let the system reason about what it needs to do, and achieve an outcome? So what outcome do you want to achieve? So for example, I want to do a credit risk assessment, as an example. How do I build an autonomous system with agents, of multiple agents, running swarms of agents, that will understand what to do, bring all the bits together, assemble a plan, reason about doing it, and then deliver it? This is the future. This is what's going to happen over the next 2 or 3 years. Now, I know you're going to say legacy migration, but actually now with this technology, you can do migration significantly quicker than you're able to. One of the biggest challenges has been, and the vendors who are out there, they rest on the laurels because, hey, my system is embedded, I've got a moat, and to move from my system to something else is millions and millions, and they're all resting on the laurels because they think that actually it's hard to replace. To be honest, those days are gone. You can now replace systems significantly quicker with an ROI using these kind of agentic tools, and therefore they're no longer safe. So this is just an example of trying to understand where things are today, which is no autonomy. So if you're using a chatbot, hasn't been, there has been autonomy. Assistants, you can do lots. So if you guys use Perplexity or OpenAI and you type stuff in, you may have seen that it's reasoning. It's going, I'm doing this, then I'm doing this, then I'm doing this. And you can see actually work out what it needs to do, right? Which is amazing. What we see happening is conditional autonomy and eventually full autonomy, which is how can you build a context with all your data across systems? I'm not saying that's easy, but how do you do that? How do you then do what I've just described, planning, an execution, and autonomous running, so you can get the outcome that you want? So I think in the next 2 to 3 years, you'll get level 3, and in the next 3 to 5 years, you'll get full autonomy in systems. Now, some of these processes can be automated already, to be honest. Some of the things that you need as a foundation is some of the things my portfolio companies are working on. One of them is building systems end-to-end. Some people call it AI engineering. Is moving from vibe coding to saying, hey, I want to build a complex system. I describe what I want in the context, and you get AI engineers to work to build it, and it builds it end-to-end for you. So my portfolio companies are doing that at the moment. This is the kind of stuff we're working on. So this is just an example. So if you don't know what an agent is and how it works, these are the characteristics of what an agent is. You need memory, you need data and content. So if you're a medium and large enterprise, you may have 50, 30, 20, whatever systems over here that I need to pull out. So let's take the credit risk example. I may need to go to 5 or 6 different systems, pull the bits of data off, assemble them, and push it into one or more agents who will then do the execution. So the memory is around how do you do that. And it's simplified. They're saying RAG, if some of you may know what RAG is, but don't worry about it. Memory is, again, a lot more complicated than just RAG. The planning, as I mentioned already, is I want to achieve an outcome. How do I get to the outcome? And the agent with the data and the context will plan it out for you, and then you let it run. Now, you can interfere with that. Human in the loop or human over the loop, you still have that, right? So you're not removing the person, but eventually you will be happy and you'll have explainability, so it will do it. And then on the right-hand side, you've got tools that will give access to systems, call APIs, etc., to pull the system together. And the sort of things at the bottom are how you do it. Thought, action, observation, and etc. in a loop. So this is some of the stuff. I'm going to run out of time very quickly, but this is stuff around how do you build context and a cognitive engine that can stand systems. The right-hand side is some of the techniques, building knowledge graphs, if you've heard of knowledge graphs, and if you haven't, come and talk to me about it, is how do you build semantic models that can understand content and data and the links between that data. That's what knowledge graphs are. Now, in the past, it would take you months or years to build these. Now, part of the work we're doing in one of my companies is we're literally be able to build knowledge graphs dynamically. So you can build them, not real time, but significantly quicker. One of the biggest challenges every firm has, and I've worked in data for 20 years, is fixing the data problem. As I'm sure you know, firms have spent hundreds and hundreds of millions trying to fix data, building data lakes or building warehouses and lake houses and all of that stuff. If you went and said to your organization, okay, have we solved the data problem? Have we solved the data quality problem? Have we solved the data management problem? Most firms are going to still say no, because you're still doing a hell of a lot of work. You still have armies of people working in data, trying to fix the data. And I know one very large American bank, they have 300 people, it's hundreds of people, manually still doing this in 2026. So as an example, you could take that and you can use these autonomous agents and solve a lot of the data problems you need and get the data prepped to feed downstream into an agent. Now, unless you do that, you can't do it. You can't use agents without data. So you've got to solve that problem as well. And people forget that. Everything's, I want to use AI and use an agent. Well, actually, you can't do anything until you actually fix your data. And this is just an example of what it looks like. I won't describe it. You can get in touch and I'll tell you. But it's about how do you get the data, do the stuff in the middle and understand it and standardize it. And interestingly, standardization is really hard in the traditional world. Vendors haven't fixed it. This new world of agents and LLMs, you can actually fix the data and do the transformation to a standard a lot more easily. So, things like compliance. If you imagine your reg and compliance teams, there's a large number of people manually doing onboarding or compliance checks or whatever else. Well, the key thing is, given what I've described to you around how agents can work, the benefits are clear. And the interesting thing is also the migration to that is not like tens of millions or hundreds of millions. It's actually an ROI that can stack up. So one of the key areas which everybody has a problem with is business intelligence and reporting. If you talk about reporting, it's a bloody nightmare. You've got Power BI, you've got business objects, you've got ClickView, whatever else. And if anybody wants to change anything, you've got days of work to do to build the next report and put it live. Generative BI is a model where literally you have your data pools with all the agentic stuff I described to you, and you can then describe the report that you want, and it will create it for you. Now, that's a vision, right? I'm not telling you this is easy, but I'm saying that is now doable. That kind of thing is now doable. And the interesting thing, going back to the migration, you can take all your reports in that you do already, understand them, and then migrate them if you want. Not that you want to, but you can. So, some of the areas around meta agents being able to build intelligent infrastructure. So this is about changing the way you think about how to build the next generation of software stack that is a lot more intelligent, that runs around agents, and you can do things like research, equity research. I used to work in equity research. I worked in IT and equity research a long, long time ago. And how can you do research significantly quicker? Well, absolutely, it's doable. If you talk to any of your firms out there and you say, actually, how many of your firms have reduced their research teams? No one. Why? Why? It's crazy. Why do you can use this technology to do research better, more quickly, more accurately, tailor it for the customer. Why hasn't it happened? I think a lot of this is around inertia or fear or, I don't know, just, I don't know what to do, One of the most important things is ensuring that you have proper security. So this is some of the stuff that we talk about around making sure that everything you do is secure, is managed, won't hallucinate, etc. And this is just something, we call it Shield. You can look it up if you want. But what we do, one of the key things you have to do is bring that in as part of the architecture, because without proper regulatory compliance security, none of this is going live anyway. So ultimately, you're rewiring the workforce. This is not about putting an AI in front of the individual and go, here, use that. This is about rethinking how each person works and what they do in their job. And it's training them on that new thing and training them on that new work. And that requires rewiring the workforce. That is one of the biggest challenges. And you can see some of the stuff it talks about. It's really thinking carefully about how the agents and the systems merge with the individuals and how you change your operating model to adapt to be able to use that kind of technology. So this is just an example of how you do it, right? If you can think about today, think about the roadmap of the future, really innovation and these kind of technologies really can accelerate the change. Really, really can. And you have to be ambitious, right? You really do have to be ambitious. Innovation teams that I've seen are not necessarily, the innovation teams where they're not that ambitious. This is not simple change in most large organizations. There's a lot of work and it's a multi-year change, but actually it's now doable. With these, part of this is using tooling, agentic tooling to actually do the change work, as well as using it for the work itself. So, if we're looking at the future, the kind of things that we're working on in our portfolio companies, we're building AI-first companies. So we're building an AI-first private bank and wealth management firm. And our operating costs are going to be being 15, 70% lower. Therefore, our margins are going to be higher because we're going to undercut everybody who does that. We're going to undercut everybody by 60% in terms of fees, but also do what we call hyper-personalization. So you're personalizing every experience that that family has, right down to risk profiling. So if you guys use Instagram, you'll know that when everybody's Instagram feed will be unique. Similarly, every person's experience around their finances and their portfolios will be unique.